U.S. emergency aid to Venezuela has been rerouted to neighboring Colombia as President Nicolas Maduro continues the blockade there. In an official statement, the National Disaster Agency said the aid would be given to more than 1 million Venezuelan migrants who have fled into Colombia, leaving behind hyperinflation, food, fuel, and medicine shortages. So joining us now to discuss, investigative journalist Ben Swann. Ben, we are hearing much less about Venezuela these days following this, failed coup against Nicolas Maduro. What was it, 2 months ago? Maduro still uneasy with the idea of allowing U.S. aid come into his country. What does this rerouting say to you about where things stand now?
Well, I think the rerouting says that the U.S. is quietly backing off from what they thought was going to be an easy turn by, overthrowing Maduro, replacing him easily and quietly, and placing Juan Guaido into power. They thought it would be quick. They thought it would be easy, and it hasn't been. Remember, President Trump a couple of months ago referred to President Maduro as a tough cookie when talking about him. And even to some extent, the way he talked about it, a lot of people speculated that there was at least a little bit of respect for the fact that Maduro had stayed in power. And so I think what this tells me is, and should tell all of us, is that, look, when the U.S. says now, you know what, just Colombia, keep the stuff. And Colombia says, oh, yeah, we'll use it to help, they say, Venezuelan migrants who are there and people in Colombia, essentially means we're just going to distribute it here because it's never going to get into Venezuela, and they've accepted that.
So the U.S., though, still isn't really giving up on the hopes of installing Juan Guaido as the new president of Venezuela, Ben. The U.S. is still using other methods of pressure, more quiet methods of pressure on Maduro, such as these individual sanctions against, high-ranking Maduro officials and their families as well. The Trump administration has quickly listed and then delisted a few military officials who have defected as, the carrot and a stick ploy here. Do you see this method working?
I don't know. To me, though, more than whether it works or not, it just seems so perverse to say we're going to target individual families and individuals financially with sanctions and punish them unless they are willing to turn on the government there. And so the other thing that's happened is they had this high-ranking general who did defect and come over and say, okay, I'm going to side with Guaido. Now I'm turning against Maduro, and the U.S. lifted sanctions. But now President Trump is saying that he's not going to continue to do that for other high-ranking officials unless he sees some kind of actionable result. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means unless they actively involve themselves in a coup, unless they actively attempt to overthrow the government there in some kind of physical or presumably violent way. And again, that is, to me, more alarming than just simply the fact that they're wanting to use sanctions against people, but to say we're going to hold sanctions against you unless you overthrow the government, not walk out the door, but physically overthrow the government. And I think that should be alarming to most people. And it doesn't seem to get any coverage at all.
Yeah, no one is talking about this. I don't want to call it a soft push because it's not quite soft. It's just kind of quiet right now. Mike Pence, though, not being quiet. He's chiming in again on this topic. He's calling on our neighbors to the north, Canada, to reach out to Cuba to, quote, stop their malign influence in the country. How does Canada really play into all of this?
Well, the Canadians have had, and Canada as a nation has had a pretty strong relationship with Cuba over the years, despite all the sanctions the U.S. has had against Cuba, the embargoes that we've had against Cuba. Canada hasn't had those same kinds of relationships. And so they've had a relatively strong relationship with Cuba for decades, much to the disappointment of the U.S., actually. And so now you see Mike Pence, the vice president, coming out and saying to Canada, well, we want you to basically shame Cuba and to push them to stop supporting Maduro. But the bottom line is Cuba's not going to do that because Cuba, more than keeping friendly with Canada, is dead set and determined to not let the U.S. exert its will in Central and South America, and specifically in Venezuela right now. And so I think that this idea that Canada is going to apply some pressure by coming and saying, come on, guys, back off, that's not going to happen. Again, and I don't say this every time, and I have to say it again, it drives me bonkers that our media covers this story in a way that says Russia's involved,
Right.
Cuba's involved, Iran is involved. They're all trying to help Venezuela. And Mike Pompeo and John Bolton and Marco Rubio
Right.
say foreign interference needs to get out of Venezuela, while the U.S. is actively the foreign interference that is trying to overthrow the government there. That is not an endorsement of the Venezuelan government, but how can you tell other countries to get out when you're doing the very thing you're accusing them of doing?
Ben,
Even
it
worse.
just totally, blows my mind that they're not even realizing that it is the pot calling the kettle black, and it's like that maybe they know, and they just think, you know what? The U.S. is the U.S. is the only country that should involve themselves in other people's policy. So I guess we'll see how this plays out.
That's real quick. That's even scarier, that you think you have the moral authority when others do not. That's scary.
I know. All right, Ben, this is going to obviously continue for a long time until something happens. So we will be back to talk about it. As always, Ben, appreciate your take on this.
Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.